He gets us. A SuperBowl ad that aired recently, a minute ad, and then another 15-second ad during the Super Bowl. Incited a lot of controversy. Sparks have flown in the evangelical world especially. And the dust-up has made for some strange bedfellows. If you look at Christianity through a deconstruction lens and you see kind of a group over here who have deconstructed, or they're more on the progressive end of the spectrum, and then you look back across the street at the Pharisees, not the Pharisees, at the Orthodox or evangelical end in the Western Hemisphere, you find chirping from both sides of the aisles. And I want to give you a few reasons on why I think they might both be whiffing at this. Swing and a miss, at least. That and more after this. Now, I have to be honest. I've spent some time on both ends of that spectrum. I never really considered myself a progressive Christian. However, I do see, I have walked that path, and I've listened to a great deal of friends and acquaintances that happen to be fine with that label. And I probably feel more comfortable in a room on that side than I do with the side that I used to reside in for most of my Christian life. And that is more of an evangelical Orthodox kind of approach to Christianity. Something that's fallen on hard times lately since they've gotten so intertwined and connected with political movements. However, I must admit to you, if I would have seen the commercial I'm about to show you 10 years ago, maybe even 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 years ago, before I began my deconstruction, I would have condemned it as readily as the usual suspects on that end of the spectrum. Todd Friel, the evangelicals who have their undies in a bunch because of the way Jesus was presented in this ad. Before I talk to you too much about the ad, I should probably show it to you. So this ad aired during the Super Bowl, and I'll give you my first impression of it after I show it to you here.
Don't ask me what you know is true. Don't have to tell you I love your precious heart. I was standing, you were there. Two worlds collided, and they could never tear us apart. We can live for 1,000 years.
So yes, that was the ad that had...
Until I went from 184 to
excuse
123. I was doing everything right. I
cut back over to it. That was the ad that had sparked so much controversy at the time. And I gotta close it now, and I'm gonna have to bring it back in a second. But when I first saw that ad, I'm going to be completely honest with you, I was a little taken aback. I said to myself, washing feet is so first century. Will the people watching it really get it? And I was distracted by the metaphor, the washing of the feet. My wife wasn't. She watched the whole video with me, the whole ad. And at the end of it, she gave me a gentle rebuke. She said, yeah, but it was beautiful. I didn't take the time to just let it soak in and watch it again. So I went to YouTube and watched it during the game because I didn't have a dog in the fight again. And I realized how wrong my initial reception of the video was. After all, even if the majority of people who don't understand what it meant that Jesus washed feet, well, I don't know, maybe if we lived in a time where somebody had invented something you could hold in your hand that contains on it the sum total of all of human wisdom, maybe they could go to an app on this and do a Google search for Jesus washes feet and see what comes up to understand it better. But those of us who've had a Sunday school background, a Christian background, certainly knew what it meant. And I was trying to view it through the eyes of somebody young who didn't have that background. And yet my wife pointed out that the expression of the ad was so well done. It conveyed empathy and compassion. You could tell, even though it might seem to some like a silly fetish at the time, it conveyed the idea that there was love taking place. And so I'm trying to work as I'm talking to you here. So I didn't really truly appreciate the ad till the second time through. And when that second time through came through, I saw just how relevant it was, how timely it was, and how beautiful it was. Now, at the same time, there were many Christians who were watching this ad and apparently cringing and reacting in a very different way than my wife reacted to this ad, and that I grew to react to this ad. And some of them were from surprising places. I think I want to handle the progressive end of the spectrum at the end of all this, because I think it's minimal compared to everything. The typical Christian reaction, I think it's minimal. I think basically progressives, what they have against the commercial wasn't the commercial itself. I think they have a problem with the fallacy of ad hominem. They're attacking the messenger. They can't see the message because of the messenger. It's like conservative friends that I know that can't truly appreciate art because of the particular artist. Sean Penn is one of the greatest actors of our generation, but some people can't appreciate Sean Penn playing a role because they can't get past his politics because they disagree with it. And that to me is a shame. That to me, if you can't appreciate a piece of art, which this commercial was a piece of art. And so I'm surprised to find a little bit of pushback on the other end of the spectrum, in the progressive end. They don't like some of the donors to this campaign. They don't like that one of the donors, well, here I am handling the progressive criticisms. They don't like the fact that the owner of Hobby Lobby is one of the big dollar donors to this. Okay, I guess I'm doing the progressive end first. Let's just do this. The criticisms I've heard from the progressive end have nothing to do with the commercial. They love it. They love the commercial. They love that it's inclusive, that it shows Jesus in a light where he's not shunning or shaming people. That, quite frankly, if he wanted to in Judea, he would have stood for it, because he did stand for the outcast and those who were. He did try to elevate thought about Samaritans and about even lepers and about women and so forth. And they get that part of Jesus right. And my progressive friends love the ad for that. They just don't like who funded it. And they don't like the cost of it, which I think I'm going to attack that first. How many people on both ends of the spectrum I've seen saying, we could have taken this $100 million and fed the poor or done something else with it. And I always, because of my upbringing, the way my father brought me up, I don't judge how people spend their money. But to me, this is a really odd criticism. What you're really seeing here in this whole controversy is a war over who gets to sit Jesus on their lap and put their arm up his back and speak for him. They're using Jesus as a ventriloquist dummy. And who gets to use this Jesus? The Pharisees over there or the people over here who says Jesus wouldn't have spent $100 million on this ad. Well, here I have to say, I know some progressives have a love-hate relationship with the Bible. But here I've got to say, are you ridiculous? Seriously. Jesus had this very frickin' conversation when a woman who took very precious ointment and she cracked it open, ointment that could have cost 2 to 3 months regular wages, or in some cases a year of wages for the average person. And believe me, there was poverty in Christ's day. And she broke this ointment open and she adorned Christ with it. She anointed Jesus with this ointment. And who were the, forgive me, the sad, I want to say something strong, but it's a Sunday morning. Who were the mealy-mouthed SO, who were the punk-ass, let me try and be more Sunday morning. Who were the detractors of this beautiful moment? Well, the disciples. They didn't get it. And guess what they said? What a waste. We could have taken this money and fed the poor. And you know who was leading the rebellion? A guy named Judas. I'm not making this up. Look it up, friends. Judas actually said we could have taken this and sold it and fed the poor. Well, and the gospel narrator said Judas would have taken a taste of it, a taste of the on the side. He was dipping into the bag, to the sack to fund his own greed. I'm not saying my progressive friends or the people who criticize this commercial for it costing so much would do that. But I am saying shut the front door. Yeah, you obviously have forgotten that moment in the life of Jesus where he said, the poor you will have with you always. But she is the one person in the whole frickin' room who gets it. Now, I'm sorry, if you haven't paid attention, it's not the cost of this ad that is outrageous. 123 million people watched the ad initially, live. 123 million. You know how many people have watched it since? You know how much free airplay this ad has gotten since? Probably 10 times that number. It was money well spent, and it represented Christ in an actual way that reflected his teaching and his words and his attitude. It was a magnification of Christ that was beautiful. And I don't care if Catholics paid for it, or the Church of Latter-day Saints, or Sean Penn and Alec Baldwin, or Jim Caviezel and Mel Gibson. I'm going to stand up and applaud when finally the world gets to see a version of Jesus that is closest to the man we meet in the Gospels. To a man who said, turn the other cheek, who said, walk the extra mile, to a man who asked the question, who is my neighbor? By the way, the criticisms of this ad from the other side are that, it doesn't talk about sin or repentance, or it doesn't talk about the gospel message or anything. See, I'm going to come to that in a second, but let me finish with my progressive friends first. So the criticism over the money spent. I just saw a report that more people search Jesus after the Super Bowl than they do at Christmas. I think it was effective. And I think we do have to have a reset on who Jesus is and what he taught. And I bring that up to you because on the other end of the spectrum, the Pharisees standing on the other side of the corner hated the commercial. They called it woke Jesus. They called it sissy Jesus. Oh, I'm gonna have to get that ad while I'm talking. Sorry. Body. You could hear me typing. I'm typing in Vadi Bakum. He gets us because Vadi doesn't, but you're gonna have to see this one too. Yeah, it's short. I've got to show it to you. Let me open it now and steal the. But it just came to my mind, so I hope I don't get distracted here. I'm gonna bring it into the program, but let me finish, if you don't mind, with my progressive friends who can't stand the fact that this ad was paid for by people they disagree with about, quite frankly, Christianity. People that they think are overtly too hard or unenlightened when it comes to, well, to be frank, the LGBTQ plus question or community. And they say this Hobby Lobby guy and Christianity Today and some of these other big donors, they've gotten it wrong in the past about the LGBTQ community. And then I watch this commercial which gets it completely right. And I say to myself, well, isn't it possible for people to grow? Shouldn't people who've gone through deconstruction, shouldn't people who major in deconstruction and help others through it have room, have grace and space for people who years ago were promoting the Chick-fil-A Day, like I was at the time, and have come all the way over here to the point where you yourself, my progressive friend, could have made this commercial and been proud of it. Where a gay man or a woman or a transgender person could watch this commercial and feel elevated and feel heard. Wow. Well, look, if the Hobby Lobby guy and Christianity Today and whoever else donated to make this commercial was wrong yesterday, I'm applauding them for what they're promoting, what they're putting their money behind today. That doesn't mean I endorse everything about them. I saw Dan McClellan, one of my favorite Bible scholars, answering this very question, is the He Gets Us commercial unbiblical? And he starts out with the defense of the commercial, but the writing on the screen says, I'm going to ignore for the time being the hypocrisy and the irony of the Green family, the owners of Hobby Lobby, about all this. So even he can't give up that little, fly in his soup about the fact of what they were yesterday, or what they may still be, but what you can't divorce it from what they spent from the finished product. Now, granted, they're just a few of the donors. We don't know who the other donors are. It's anonymous. We can only judge them from their commercials and from their website. And if you start to judge who's giving money to it, well, you know what kind of people give money to your political party? Do you think you agree with everyone who gives money to your political party? Do you think some of them wouldn't make you cringe? I don't know. I don't care if Bono made this commercial or Billy Graham made this commercial. It hit the right chord, and it was beautiful, and it was lovely, and it made all the right people angry. Doesn't it bother you, progressive friend, that you are standing with the Sean Fuchs and with the Todd Friels and with all the Calvinists over at Apologia Studios that have their undies in a bunch over this, doesn't it give you a little bit of pause about your criticism when you realize who you're standing with? That's Bella in the background saying amen. Thank you, Bella. Anyway, enough of the progressive wing of the party. I want to show you the second commercial that aired at the Super Bowl. And it was a commercial. Here it is. It was a commercial. Again, another Who Gets Us commercial. This one was called Who Is My Neighbor? Now, again, this was 16 seconds. Let's take a look. That's another one, and the images just inflamed people because it's showing people in bars, it's showing refugees, it's showing people who don't maybe sit in the pew behind you on Sunday, it's showing people who you maybe crossed the street before you encountered. I'm not speaking for everybody, I'm speaking for some people. And it drives them crazy. And it leads me back to the first commercial that many people couldn't handle. And I want to go through it a little bit with you, frame by frame, to talk to you a little bit about what drove the right side of the room crazy about this commercial, what they couldn't stomach, what drove the elder brother in the field mad with the idea of sitting at the same table with his little brother. What made the elder brother in the field furious that the father would slay the fatted calf and give him a hero's welcome home. Let's take a look at it, and I'll try and work through it. Maybe stop it frame by frame if I could. So let me get to where I need to be, which is right here. Let's see if this works. All right, I'm going to go back a little bit to that picture for a second, and we're going to stop there. Now, this looks like a family, and it may be depicting alienation between a father and a son. This may be the prodigal son metaphor here. You see the son washing the father's feet. He looks like a pretty conservative guy. His son looks less conservative. And it's giving you that contrast. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the soundtrack. In Excess, Michael Hutchence. And the reason I left the captions on is so you could see what is being sung as the background of this beautiful commercial. It's a beautiful song, not meant really to depict the two worlds of Christ and the rest of us, but maybe to talk about lovers. I don't know, but it is a love song. Now, I imagine there are some out there that are furious that a secular song was used to present Jesus and the thought and the mindset of Jesus when he went to the woman at the well, or when he stood up in my favorite story that's not in the original New Testament, the woman caught in adultery, when he stood in between her and judgment from the holier than thou. Michael Hutchence, the guy who died possibly in a strange sexual asphyxiation accident in an affair with another man's wife. Really? You know how many people are angry that this song was used? Because it's like it's like the Renaissance artist who used the town prostitute as the model for the Madonna in his picture of the Madonna and Child. Outrageous is what they're thinking. And I just thought to myself, how beautiful. Wendy herself said to me, that's the perfect song for these images. So here we start with what looks like the prodigal son. I don't know. I didn't make the commercial. I'm guessing as you are. I'm just going off what the implications are of these images. How can you get mad at the story of the prodigal son? Can I tell you one story? That's my favorite passage in all of Scripture. If I was going to be marooned on an island and I could only have one chapter in all of Scripture, I'd ask for Luke 15. The trilogy of beautiful parables about how God truly feels about us as a lost sheep, as a lost coin, and as a lost son. And he sees value in us where our neighbors, even maybe our own brothers, want nothing to do with us. Nothing but scorn and shame and shunning. This is the story Jesus told, and here we see it depicted in kind of a Norman Rockwell-esque delivery. All right, let's move on to the next picture. Here you have a young black man in an alley, and maybe possibly a Hispanic policeman washing his feet. But I don't think the point is necessarily black and Hispanic here. I think it's black and police officer here. I think this might be kind of the idea that black lives do matter. And Jesus would have been just fine with that statement. More than fine with that statement. And yet, how many Christians involved themselves, ran like they heard a dog whistle over the Black Lives Matter, over legitimate grievances of police brutality? How many Christians soiled their own reputation by standing, in support, not just of the police, which we all can do as an institution, not just with the fact that 99% of policemen and women wouldn't commit the egregious actual murders that we've seen happen, and disproportionately in the black community. So here we have maybe the metaphor of Black Lives Matter. Again, it's another beautiful picture. I've got to say one thing. I was going to line up about 6 or 7 critiques of this commercial, all coming from conservative Christians who all can't get over the fact that maybe AI was used to create these images. And they're losing it. They're like, was this AI? Speaking like AI is this boogeyman, this new Christian boogeyman, like the number of the beast. You know, AI was involved. Satan uses AI. That's how he's going to, usher in Left Behind, and we're going to need Kirk Cameron or, heaven forbid, Nicolas Cage to rescue us from the Antichrist. How many Christians, from this Stuckey woman, what is her name, Allie Beth, Evangelical Barbie, who's worried about AI, and I heard 5, 6 people cringing their hand. Oh, it was AI. Well, you know what? That's a beautiful image. I don't care what created it. It's a beautiful image. All right, let's move on.
Don't ask me.
All right, this next image, you have a high school image, and you know how many different divisions there are in high school. There's the nerds, the dweebs, the geeks, the jocks, the mean girls. And here I think you have what's depicted as possibly a cheerleader and an alt chick. And the cheerleader who, well, this doesn't happen a lot in high school situations, right? And here you're seeing the depiction of how Jesus can break down barriers that seem to be unbreakable, right? And if you loved Coppola's movie with all the young Hollywood stars with the Brat Pack, where you had the Socs against the Greasers, right? This is the updated version of that. The cheerleader or the pom-pom against the alt chick who would normally not sit with each other or care to be seen with each other. here it's another beautiful thing. And it probably does witness to those who are going through this in high school, how callous and how cold it could be to go through junior high and high school and to judge others based on how they look or what table they sit at lunch or what music they listen to or how they do their hair or what their social hierarchy, position in the social hierarchy is. Wouldn't this be a better world? How many Christians have gone on the air after this commercial outraged by this woke message? Oh, it's the woke Jesus. It's the Bono Jesus. We can't have that. We need the angry guy. All right, let's keep going. I love these images.
What you know is true.
Here's one that might be having something to do with the border and with the craziness at the border from ranchers who are pretending that they are border control, and with a governor in Texas who wants to mine the Rio Grande like it's a Normandy beach in World War II. Here's something that resonates a lot more with what Jews in the Old Testament were to do with the sojourner. Guess what a sojourner means? Refugee, or what we would call an illegal immigrant today. And God, in his own voice, told the Jew, treat them as your neighbor. Receive them as you would have liked to have been received when you were wandering in the wilderness, when you came into Canaan and no one would have you. Treat them with dignity and respect in that kind of Middle Eastern hospitality where you take in the person who needs food, who needs drink, and you give them the protection of your house. You don't chant, build the wall. You don't mine the Rio Grande with razor blades. What a different world it would be if Christians were on the right side of this issue. And that doesn't mean I'm for, some kind of left-wing idea where we give them things, where we take from our neighbors their tax dollars and usher in a socialist paradise for just anyone who walks across the border. This has nothing to do with politics right now. This is a spiritual statement. One of my favorite passages in the Gospels is one of the judgments where the righteous and the wicked are being judged. And the people who think they're righteous, the people who even use the Lord's name and who tried to cast out demons and who did works of miracles in his name, all of a sudden they get door number 2 when they expected door number 1. And they're outraged and they can't believe it. And they say, Lord, Lord, what are you doing? Don't you know we did these things in your name? And Christ, who knows the heart, God who knows the heart, basically says, you took my name in vain, depart from me. You were wicked. But what I love about this story is the other end of it. The end of the righteous who are welcomed into the kingdom. And they're surprised they have an invitation. They're expecting to be denied. And they said, Lord, why are we being blessed in this way? We certainly don't deserve it. How can you show us this kind of grace? And the Lord said, when I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. And the Lord said, when I was hungry, you brought me food. And the Lord said, when I was in prison, you visited me. This is after they said to him, Lord, we never did these things to you. How can you say that? And he said, when you did them to the least of these, you did them to me. This is, wow. Have we forgotten this story? Which brings me to something else. Another criticism of this whole campaign is that it focuses too much on Jesus' humanity. And it doesn't talk about the fact that he's divine, that he's Son of God, that he was resurrected, that he's sitting at the right hand of the Most High. And some people have gone as far to say, this doesn't feel right. It feels cringy. It feels like it's wrong. And this is that disconnect. This is that disconnect with some believers who have blocked out the humanity of Jesus. They don't even look at the Gospels other than the resurrection. They've forgotten what Jesus taught in the temple. They've forgotten what Jesus taught in the byways and on the hills. It seems cringy to them to turn the other cheek. It seems un-American and unbiblical to them to think that he would tell Jews who were being oppressed by Romans to carry the soldier's sack not just 1 mile but 2, to forgive 70 times 7, to turn the other cheek. That seems cringy. We don't want to talk about that, Jesus. No, that's why so many Christians love systematic theology. It's why so many Christians want to take notes in church, but they don't want to help. They don't want to be the hands and feet of Jesus. That's why there's so few Teresas of Calcuttas. That's why there's so few Father Malachis. All right. Moving on.
Don't have to tell you.
Oh, this one really drives them nuts. Here is Planned Parenthood. And you have a girl here, and she's got a tattoo on her leg, so she must have had an abortion, because you know those girls with ink on them. They're all naughty. But anyway, here's a girl. We don't know if she works at the clinic, if maybe she's one of those people who guides girls in as somebody who shields them from the protesters. We don't know, but we can assume that the woman who's kneeling and washing her feet is part of the group behind her, the protesters behind. And she's the one out of the many who acts as Christ does. Oh, that's going to anger a lot of people. Now, I have seen this in action. I have protested outside abortion clinics with Catholic and evangelical friends, and I've seen my Catholic brothers and sisters have this attitude, the foot washing attitude. They would pray with the women going in. They would entreat them with love in their hearts. And I saw evangelicals under the banner of, well, they were really, I shouldn't call them evangelicals, the Sharia wing of Christianity. They were out of the Reform movement, hardcore Calvinists, went by the nomenclature of AHA, which says something about abolition. I used to call them, I'm no longer pastor, so I could tell you what I used to call them behind the scenes, assholes against abortion, because they'd scream at the women and yell at them, and they had anger and hatred in their hearts. So much so that they picketed my church one Sunday because I wouldn't go as far as they would in their protests, and they considered me not a real Christian, not a real pro-lifer. So they picketed my church, and that was one of the happiest days of my life, because I realized I'm making the right people angry, just like Jesus did. And I would refer to you here to the statement, live your life so that one day the Westboro Baptist Church pickets your funeral. So I hope, that's one of the things I hope. I'm not going to have a funeral, but I hope they're outside my celebration of life, which will take place in Sedona at the Devil's Bridge and at the Chapel of the Holy Cross, because I'm a little saint and I'm a little sinner. You're all welcome there, AHA, to send me off to the hell you think I have earned and deserved. But live your life as to one day be picketed by the Westboro Baptists. Here you have a statement of true love, of Christ's intercession for those who religious people wouldn't intercede for. Not until they got clean. Not until, they had a testimony, right? All right, let's move on. I'm going a little bit too slow. But each of these images, I think each of these images was so well selected. This one, possibly a mother and daughter. Obviously, the woman on the right, the older woman, has a problem with alcohol. You have bottles, empty bottles all over the kitchen. The kitchen is a mess. Somebody is interceding for her. I don't know if it's a daughter. I don't know if it's a neighbor. Somebody with the love of Christ in her heart, who has compassion, who has empathy, is telling her, I love you. I'm here. This is Celebrate Recovery. People ask me all the time, where do you see the Holy Spirit working? Because we don't see it in the church. We don't see it in these Christian movements. I see it at Celebrate Recovery. I see it with people like this who are helping each other actually walk away from death and into life with no judgment, with absolute care. That's where I see the love of Jesus. And I think this picture is beginning to show you that. And have you asked yourself yet how these images and that song could make people outraged about it? Could make people think this isn't Jesus?
Precious heart,
This one might be a little bit too much on the nose, right? You got the Texas oil man. I am saying Texas, it could be Alaska, I don't know. And you've got the environmentalist who set her sign, Clean Air Now, down because this guy is burning fossil fuels. And so here you have that moment that reminded me, I'm sorry, I know it's a powerful picture, but it reminded me of a silly comedy with Leslie Nielsen. What was it, Naked Gun? Where at the end of one of the Naked Gun movies, to show everyone was getting along, they show a Jew and a Muslim hugging each other, and they show two opposite teams on the baseball field hugging each other, and then they show a postman who hugging a dog, and all these typical people who would normally be at each other's throats are accepting each other. And I'm sorry, but that's what I thought of when I saw the oilman using his hard hat to wash the feet of the environmentalists. But I can appreciate it. I thought it was a little too much on the nose, but I get it. I appreciate it. Here's one. The suburban housewife, right? The suburban housewife with the white picket fence and the bus that's taking the immigrants and the refugees to Chicago, or bringing them from Chicago. I don't know which it is, but you have some people who brought water for them and some supplies. And here you have a woman holding a baby. A woman holding a baby, young woman holding a baby. And a suburban hausfrau, a soccer mom. This kind of reminds me of The Blind Side. All those proper women in The Blind Side who were embarrassed that this woman was interceding on the behalf of a young black man, talking behind her back. This is what that reminds me of at that point. You know, my wife has the heart of a saint, and I don't mind saying that to you. And we lived in Crystal Lake, and at one point, the people across the street from us, we became the peanut butter and jelly house where people would come to for refuge, mostly kids. But some, we had Indian neighbors who didn't feel received well by fellow Americans, whether they were in New York or in Chicago, but they were loved by my wife and taken in by my wife. And oftentimes I'd come home and that family would be in our house, and or the daughter would be over. But there was a house across the street that was hard. It was grandparents were raising their daughter's children, and they didn't really want to be. They were kind of forced into it because the daughter had left them for the barroom. And the barroom in Tennessee. She'd gone back to Tennessee, I think, to find a husband, find the next husband, the third. And she'd left her kids at this house. And those kids spent a lot of time at our house. The grandparents actually had to work, and they weren't home. Or sometimes when they were home, they were too tired. And they didn't really want to do it. They had no choice. So those kids spent a lot of time at our house, in our backyard, on our playground, and so forth. And Wendy made them food and cared for them. And I remember Wendy was on the phone with somebody who attended our church, at least sparingly, but a Christian housewife. And Wendy said, well, I would do this, but so-and-so's, they're coming over. The kids from across the street are over, and I can't really tell them to go home. And this woman said, why are you helping them? Why are you helping them? A Christian woman. Why are you helping them? And when my wife told me the story, I couldn't believe it. She said, what? Why are you helping them? I don't know how you could look at this picture and scorn it and say it doesn't do Jesus right.
You were there.
Here's one that it might be, I don't know. The woman has a headscarf. Maybe she's Muslim, maybe, Sikh, I can't tell. I think they're trying to imply it's probably somebody of another faith. Somebody of another faith who's a neighbor, and the Christian neighbor is washing her feet. And boy, did we botch post 9/11 our relationship with our Muslim brothers and sisters who are here. And Americans, I'm sorry, the black chapter in American history has always been this. Whether it would be the internment of the Japanese during World War II, whether it be our treatment of Native Americans or poor Chinamen who came to build the railroads, or African Americans who were brought here through slavery, we don't do well. We have a problem. So this is a beautiful thing. This is absolutely beautiful, because after 9/11, every Muslim was a terrorist or a potential terrorist. If you watch Fox News, if you listen to some Christian ministries, you couldn't trust them. They all wanted to come here and bring Sharia law, and they were all, potential jihadists. And we responded to the 9/11 aftermath with basically the same grace, love, and empathy that we showed gay brothers and sisters during the AIDS crisis. Stay away from them. They're lepers. You might catch something. That isn't the way Jesus treated lepers. That isn't the way Jesus would have you respond to those around you.
Two worlds collided, and they...
So this might be, I don't know exactly what this is. Somebody, silence hate, shut them up, censorship. This might be a reaction towards Colin Kaepernick. Remember? Where in the Black Lives Matter movement, he had NFL players taking a knee during the national anthem and so forth, and people wanted him shut up. They wanted him out of the NFL, and he's been blackballed ever since. So this might be a reaction to Black Lives Matter, even though the woman, it's a black woman washing the feet of it looks like a Latina woman. I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. This one's a little bit, maybe you can help me discern what's going on here, but do we really need to know when two megaphones are facing each other and there's two people sitting down in the midst of it? I recently saw on social media a Jewish woman sitting down with her Palestinian neighbor. They both have two different faiths, and they were showing each other love. They were breaking bread together. They both had made food, and the reason it stood out to me is because the Palestinian had brought dalma, what the Christians call dalma, stuffed grape leaves, over to her friend, the Jewish friend's house, to share it with her, and the Jewish friend had made something else for her Palestinian friend. And they were saying, in the midst of all this chaos, in the hatred that is being spewed from side to side, we're not going to let that break our binds. We're not going to let that interfere with the love we have for one another. I know you, and I know you're not what's being said about you. And as long as I live next to you, I got your back. You'll be safe with me. You'll be cherished with me. You'll be loved with me. Dalma's my last meal, so I get that. You take Dalma to somebody's house, it means you love them. All right. I think this one is a hat tip to Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, who put his foot in the same tub as a black man. Back when that was controversial, but it wasn't just a black man, it was a gay black man. And Mr. Rogers is doing it. Now, it's funny how Christians take credit for that. I saw a hardcore conservative Christian who hates this commercial say, oh, this is ripping off Mr. Rogers, and he was a Christian. Yeah, well, at the time, he took a lot of heat from Christians who hated it as much as not Spock's first kiss, Captain Kirk's first kiss with the Uhura. And yet this, I think, is a beautiful hat tip to Mr. Rogers. And it's two men, it looks like maybe in the South, sharing a foot bath. Now, I got to say to you, the foot thing, some people have made fun of this as like a foot fetish video, and they're missing the metaphor. But I got to say to you, I don't want anyone touching my feet, except for my wife. It gives me a little creepiness too. But I don't live in first century Judea where you walked in sandals on a road that was filled with dung. Right? It was that also, was the sewer, was the city sewer. So the washing of the feet, when Jesus washes the feet of Judas, when he washes the feet of his disciples on the night of Gethsemane, he was saying, I have come to serve. And the lowest, he had taught them for a week that in the kingdom, the lowest actually is the greatest. All week long, his disciples were bargaining. They were trying to be at the right hand of Jesus. John's mother even tried to intercede. Hey, let the sons of thunder sit at your right and your left hand side in the kingdom when you come into your glory. And Jesus said, you don't know what you're asking for. There is going to be somebody at my right hand and at my left hand, but hanging on a cross. You don't know what you're asking for. And all week long, he was teaching, the least is the greatest. The least in the kingdom is the greatest. I'm here to serve. The person who washed the feet in a household was usually the youngest son, because it was dirty, defiling. It was usually a servant. If you had company, it was a servant, or it was the youngest male son who washed the feet. It would be an outrage if the master of the house knelt down and washed the feet, because it's demeaning. It's below him. It's beneath him. So when Jesus was doing this, imagine the impact it must have had. All right. But listen, foot massages, I'm with Jules of, Quentin Tarantino fame there. I'm on Team Jules in Pulp Fiction. I don't want a man touching my feet. Nobody but my wife. All right. And they end with this picture which drove people crazy. Now, here's where my progressive friends miss out. The Greens, whoever, Christianity Today, whatever, if they don't fully find themselves on the same page as you with the LGBTQ community, they're certainly way better than the critics of this commercial, who you'll see in a minute group our LGBTQ Q+ brethren with terrorists and racists and murderers. That's how the Pharisees view them. Here you have an Orthodox priest washing the feet of maybe a transgender man, certainly somebody who's in the Q+ community. That's, if you can go by looks, I may be wrong. He looks like Terry from Reno 911 because he's a roller skating guy. And so the message is clear here, and it drove people crazy who saw this commercial. They ended with this. How dare they end with a priest washing the feet of somebody in the queer community? How dare they? And then the words that follow this. Jesus didn't teach hate. Wow. This commercial is not just geared for people who don't know who Jesus is, for people who didn't have a Sunday school background, for people who think foot washing is a little bit weird, but these pictures are intriguing and mysterious, and they've inspired me to go to Google and check out who Jesus was. This wasn't just for that community. This was for the community that has driven that community from the local church. This was for both audiences to hear. That's why I love Luke 15. Do you know there were two audiences in Luke 15? There were the outcasts whom Jesus was among. If you go back and you look at Luke 15, the receptive audience, the people who wanted to hear Jesus, who wanted him in their company, who embraced him, who came to hear him, they were the outcasts. The religious people were standing on the other corner judging Jesus. Look at him. Look at him. He's having dinner with them. Look at him. He's partaking with them. There were two audiences in Luke 15. One was receptive and one was critical. There are two audiences for this commercial. One will be receptive, and they're Googling right now who Jesus is. They want to know this Jesus, because the Jesus they've known is angry and judgmental and bigoted and hypocritical. The Jesus they know is expressed in the temperament and the actions and the words of the elder brother in the field, of the Pharisees on the corner, of the people who are picking up stones. See, the real power of Jesus, many Christians miss his teaching, his words, prior to all the stuff that you only want to focus apologetics on, the crucifixion, resurrection, ascension. No, Jesus had a life before that, and it was controversial enough to get him killed. And he got so many people angry with his words, not because he walked on water or turned water into wine, not because he rose from the dead. His words brought him to that cross. His actions, the way he treated both what some considered the wicked and those who were the self-righteous. There are two audiences for this commercial, and the self-righteous are reacting like they do. Outraged. This is woke Jesus. This is sissy Jesus. I'll show you how they're reacting in a moment. Jesus didn't teach hate.
We can live for 1,000 years.
So the message is love your neighbor. And people who don't like this are trying to say, what's the message here? The message is right there. Love your neighbor. Jesus taught on this. When the doctor of the law wanted to trap him, and he said, "Who is my neighbor?" And he tells the story of the Samaritan and the Jericho road. Jews were passing by him. Not just Jews. The spiritual leadership, the priest and the Levite, people who worked in the temple, people who were looked up to, people who mother and father wanted their children to grow up and be a priest or a Levite if they had the capacity to. People that were looked up to. Well, they passed on by. People who so-called spoke for God, they passed on by. They were indifferent. The Samaritan the person hated most in Jesus' day by Jews, the racism of the very element in which Jesus lived, they hated the Samaritans. The hero of the story was a Samaritan. That would be like today, making the hero of the story a transgender Muslim. Yeah. All right. That's what Jesus did in his day by making the hero of the story a Samaritan. Who's my neighbor? This commercial was for both audiences. The one that isn't being seen, that isn't being heard, that is being ostracized by religious people who have taken the Lord's name in vain, and those who have taken the Lord's name in vain. All right. I'm going to stop there and I'm going to show you two contrasts. Two things that were, I guess, inspired to attack what we see here. The first one is the Vaughty Bacchum. He is a Calvinist.
Despise the picture that's painted in our culture of this sissified, needy Jesus. Amen? And that's who he is. He's a sissified, needy Jesus. That's what worries me about those who don't...
Oh, okay. Let me start it again. It was playing very fast. Here's his response, or at least people speaking in his name responding to the commercial you've just seen.
I despise the picture that's painted in our culture of this sissified, needy Jesus. Amen? And that's who he is. He's a sissified, needy Jesus. That's what worries me about those who don't want to preach on sin, because people already know that they're bad. No, we don't. We don't recognize that we have sinned against the holy and righteous God. I serve the great God of the universe, who gets angry and pours out his wrath, who demonstrated his wrath when he poured it out on his own son. And it amazes me that we believe this, that God would crush and kill his own son, but let you slide.
That's the gospel message on that side of the aisle. God's angry, and you better get a bar of soap before you come sit at this table, because you're not welcome at this table. And we're working in the field. We've got calluses. We could show you our calluses. We're in the field from sun up to sunset. Where have you been? You've been in the bar room. You've been eating pig slop in the sty. You've been wasting your father's inheritance. You don't have a right to a table, a seat at the table. You shouldn't get the fatted calf. That would be extravagant. That would be a sissy Jesus who fell on the neck of a prodigal. That's the message you're getting from the other side of the street. Let me show you one other one. This one is being shared by a lot of people as what is being said. Let me see what number this is. Give me a second, folks. This one is number 29. Number 29. All right. I don't have a producer. I'm my own producer. So bear with me here. Are you ready for this one? All right, let's go with this one. This is one that's being said should have been the ad that was played. So the ad that was played wasn't good. Wasn't the real Jesus. Wasn't the Jesus we want you to know. This is the real Jesus. Here we go. By the way, I gotta stop it here. One of the things that makes me smile is the Christians who they don't have the talent to create art themselves, so they just try and mimic or mock people who actually do have the talent. So, they use the same music here in their little commercial, which is fascinating to me. But okay, they're using the same music. My father used to say of certain people who destroy and they don't build anything, he said they're like Satan in the way that Satan is a mimic, that he really doesn't have any creativity other than to destroy something other people have built. And he said you could see that when they don't have any real creativity themselves, they have to go into something that somebody else built and destroy it from within. So that occurred to me when I saw that they used the same music and the same style and the same template to make their video, because they want to show you they could do it better and it's more accurate, you see, because they speak for Jesus and you don't. So you start out with the former witch, and see, this is why they want to point to all former things. You were this, but now you're this. And so this is what Jesus does. Jesus doesn't meet you when you were back there. He is transformative, and we want to focus on the outcome, not the over there, because over there is messy. The fact that Jesus did eat with people who were despicable in your eyes, the fact that he'd call Matthew, a tax collector, to follow him, the fact that he'd eat at the table of Zacchaeus, the fact that when he was invited into a Pharisee's home to eat, he'd allow a woman to touch him, a woman of maybe ill repute, to come in and to adorn him. We don't want to talk about that Jesus. We don't want to talk about the Jesus who would minister to lepers, who would speak to a woman of ill repute at midday at a well. Let's not talk about that Jesus. Here, I love this one. Dawkins, former right-hand man. It's just accepted that we all should hate Richard Dawkins. If you're a Christian, you should look at Richard Dawkins like he's a henchman of the devil himself. Why is Richard Dawkins hated? Because he is a spokesperson for biological evolution, and we all know the earth is only 6,000 years old, and God created it 6,000 years ago, and the flood happened, a few thousand years ago. And so we got to hate Richard Dawkins, because we all know that evolution isn't true. It's a lie, and it leads to all kinds of bad things. Also, Richard Dawkins is an atheist, and he's a critique of Christianity. They never take the time to realize that the Christianity he's critiquing, we should probably be critiquing too, because it's absurd and it leads people astray. But here, Richard Dawkins is presented like Hugh Hefner would be, or Joseph Stalin. Here, it's Stalin's former right-hand man. All right, former right-hand man. This guy was like an assistant. But anyway, let's pretend he was a former right-hand man, like he was a henchman. And, like he was Frank Nitti to Al Capone, and Frank Nitti trusted the Lord now. So Dawkins, former right-hand man. Does God love Dawkins? Does Jesus love Richard Dawkins? I think he does. I don't know. I guess not.
Don't ask me.
Okay, here you have a self-proclaimed former jihadist who's now a Christian apologist.
What you know is true.
Former KKK.
Don't have to tell you.
Former drug addict. I've got to stop here. This guy is a preacher here in the Arizona area. I have to say, he's kind of a hate preacher. And I think he was probably behind the making of this video. But he's a hardcore Calvinist, apology at church. He assaults or insults, I should say, Mormons outside their temple, trying to convince them that they're wrong. He goes outside abortion clinics. He's part of that AHA movement that I was talking to you about earlier. And I guess he was a former drug addict. And so has Jesus made him a better person? I know a lot of people would say no, including a lot of Christians who would say this guy is a loose cannon. But all right, let's pretend we don't know that.
I love your precious heart.
Former gang leader? Cool. All right, here we go. Former drag queen and prostitute. So if you're a former drag queen, then you're the same as being a former racist and terrorist. And so here's where they start throwing the Q plus community under the bus and saying, see, yeah, Jesus loves you, but you got to be celibate, or you got to pretend to be straight, or you got to go to conversion therapy. You can't really be yourself, because we all know that that's a bozo no. Okay.
I was standing.
Former abortionist, of course.
You were there.
Former transgender.
Two worlds collided, and they could never tear us apart.
All right, I got to stop on Rosaria Butterfield. Most of these people in this commercial are not Christian; they're Calvinists, which I know is a branch of Christianity. But there's a reason that they're Calvinists. You see, those are the true elect, and they're sure that they're elect. They were predetermined to be elect, but they're not so sure about the rest of us. And the fact that this commercial links a former lesbian, who now she's a pastor's wife and she's straight. See what Christ can do. See what Christianity can do. They could change your sexual identity and your proclivities, because those are naughty and backward and equal to being a terrorist and a racist KKK person and a gang leader and a prostitute. So this is the commercial that they wanted to air. But the problem is, this is what people have heard for 30 years. This is what's emptying churches. This is why the next generation, when they're asked about the Christianity in America, the things they list, the top 5 things they list are hypocritical, judgmental, and bigoted. This message has gotten out there, folks. We've heard it loud and clear, and this is why the He Gets Us people are putting forward a different message, a message that comes right from the words and the teaching and the reception of Jesus in his day. And there's a reason that message feels cringy to modern Christians, to new evangelicals. It's because they don't hear that Jesus anymore. They don't want to hear that Jesus. Russell Moore said he's talked to pastors who said they were quoting Jesus from the pulpit, from the Gospels. And they quoted "Turn the Other Cheek," and they were rebuked afterwards by people in the pew who came up to them and they said, "Where'd you get that from?" And he said some of them didn't even know it was the words of Jesus. Maybe they thought it was Bono who said "Turn the Other Cheek." I had a woman respond to one of my messages where I was talking about the Jericho Road and love your neighbor. And she had been a Christian all her life. She was in her, late 70s, 80s. And her response to my message was, "I can't love my neighbor." This is a Jesus follower. She apparently didn't know those were Jesus's words. Part of a movement, dispensationalism, which has a commandment, "Thou shalt not have any other gods above the Apostle Paul," or, "Thou shalt not take Paul's name in vain." And so, I don't know, maybe she set aside those teachings of Jesus? I don't know. All I can say, folks, is I've gone way too long today, and I just want to say, if I'm the only guy in the room, if I'm the only other Christian aside from my wife that applauds these commercials and says we need more of them, and I'm grateful that wealthy Americans, I spend a lot of time in my field with wealthy Americans, an ungodly amount of time I spend with people who have great wealth, and I comment frequently how few of them are authentic, are real, are thoughtful. I know this sounds like a judgment, but many of them are callous. Many of them are superficial and have money and status at the front of their mindset. Many of them are like that prince whom Jesus says, what profit a man who gains the whole world but loses his soul? And so I am thrilled that there's a wealthy group of Jesus followers who are willing to put their money into a message that says Jesus isn't that guy that you've heard about that hates Mexicans, that hates liberals, that hates gay people, that hates Muslims. Jesus isn't that guy. You've been served another and different Jesus, a Jesus of the Reformation, a Jesus of modern evangelicalism, a Jesus of a narrow reading of the Bible, a Jesus of Paul's seen through a twisted lens of Saul of Tarsus. Let's look at the Jesus who was dragged to a cross. Let's look at what he actually taught. Let's look at those red letters in the Bible that you're trying to beat me to death with. Let's consider them once again, maybe for the first time. Thanks for joining me, folks. We'll see you again next week.